it's this very segmented, severed, separated and divided theology, and as it pertains to the New Testament, that's the big dispensation. We've been in this 2,000-year moment, dispensation, era of time, but all it really is it's a parenthesis. It's this parenthetical moment where God has this original and primary plan for the nation state of Israel, that are his chosen people. But Israel, because they rejected their Messiah 2,000 years ago in the earthly ministry of Christ, God decided to have a separate, a B plan. And so we've been living for these past 2,000 years in this 2,000-year-long parenthetical era moment where God is doing something with his stepchildren. He's doing something with the church, but he's really excited about Israel. And
all right, so I think the most likely scenario here, as I'm watching this and we're listening to this together and evaluating this, I mean, it's basically, it seems obvious to me that Webbon has not done any research into dispensationalism whatsoever. I'm not sure why, I'm not really sure why he's talking on dispensationalism. I'm not sure what qualified him, or maybe they're just friends, and so McIntyre wanted to have him on. I'm not sure how that conversation happened, but it seems obvious he hasn't actually read any dispensationalists. He seems to be just repeating some of the same old arguments that we've talked about before on the podcast, and which make no sense whatsoever. If you were just to read, Michael Vlock, my dear friend and colleague, if you were to read Larry Pettigrew, Paul Henneberry, you get on the list, Craig Blazing, Darrell Bach, all these guys, right? I mean, you would not hear this kind of language. In fact, I'm really excited for the newest book that Henneberry is coming out with. I read an advanced copy, and he just talks about this issue in great terms, just talking about how it's the most ridiculous thing in the world to think that there's a plan A, plan B, that the church is a parenthesis or whatever. I mean, the Old Testament is filled with prophecies about Gentile salvation and all of that. So to say things like this is really kind of ridiculous. And I'm just, again, not sure. I'm assuming it's just ignorance. I mean, that's what it has to be. The only other alternative is that he's trying to deceive people, but why would he do that? It seems like it's just ignorance. God's always had a plan for the Gentiles. He's always included that plan, even in the covenants and the prophecies. So, I think that's just, a lot of times people who are trying to critique dispensationalism, they just don't have a firm grasp on the Old Testament. And so again, I don't know, if Webbon has done studying in the Old Testament or not, but I mean, it's very clear that the Gentiles are found there. Every dispensationalist talks about God's plan for the Gentiles and how he saves them. I mean, it's just very clear. So, and also he goes on to say this in multiple places, but he talks about how the church is viewed as like a stepchild who's not really important, and people in the church who believe in dispensationalism think that they're second best, or that they don't really, God doesn't really love them. They're just, the stepchild, and the real child gets everything. And listen, I don't know anybody like that. I suppose you could find somebody who believes all sorts of wacko stuff, right? But the whole point is, these are the classic straw man arguments, which nobody believes. Like, it just has no bearing on reality. In fact, as I was watching the video, I was like, yeah, it's weird because there are so many positive receptions to these kinds of comments, just because people, don't know. And so they're saying, oh yeah, if that's what dispensationalists believe, then of course we hate them and we don't like that. But then there were a few people that were saying, and I thought it was funny because they said, yeah, I wouldn't listen to Joel Webbon on dispensationalism. This is just straw manning and there's no, basis to what he's saying. I'm like, at least one listener on the McIntyre show understands what's going on. And so it's one of those things where, yeah, the reason we're doing this is just because it's a popular show. Webbon is a popular personality, but I think it's important to just show we need to hold people like this accountable. And the way that he's representing dispensationalism is definitely not how any dispensationalist would represent it. And fair-minded critics as well would say, yeah, that's not how this should be understood. But again, if he's never had any interaction with, how to present arguments and interact with people, okay, but this let this be a critique of his critique, as it were, and hopefully challenge him with regard to that.